Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Admiration. This week we have a really fun ad for you. I mean, we kind of do every week, but this was one that really interested me because of the brand. So what we've done is we've looked at an ad from Liquid Death for their new product within the range, which is Death Dust, which is an electrolyte powder, and we've looked at it in the US. And I think probably lots of people who'd be watching this have heard lots about the brand and how it's broken category codes and how it's done completely different stuff in establishing itself, and definitely isn't what you think of as a water brand. So it's really interesting for us to see what they've done with their recent advertising. Shall we jump in and have a look at it?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's gonna be so funny.
Hey, kids!
No way! Ozzy Osbourne?
Death Dust? Take it from me. Don't snort that stuff.
We weren't planning on snorting it.
Yeah, we're gonna mix it with water and hydrate.
It's got electrolytes, which your body needs.
Yeah, it's delicious.
Whatever you do, don't try freebasing it.
Free what?
And never, ever inject it.
And how would we even...
And don't even think about boofing it, you little perverts.
Boof?
You know, where you stick it up your...
I'm obviously finding that very funny. Shall we have a little look and see what other people thought of it?
Yeah, let's have a look at the results. There you go. I mean, it sits in the top 5% of all US ads that we've tested in terms of its sales impact. And then when we look at brand impact, that's sitting in the top 30% of all the ads that we've looked at in the US. I think the measure that stands out the most there is distinctiveness, how distinctive the ad is. Something like 60 something percent of all the audience thought it was actually quite different versus an average of like just 35 for
Wow.
for the typical US ad, which is huge. It's double the amount of people who would have said an ad was quite different versus what they're typically used to seeing within the US.
I think that's nice. It's nice because obviously that's something that we know if something's different, then it grabs their attention, so people are likely to notice the ad. It's also nice though because it's completely in keeping with their brand, right? The whole idea
Yeah.
of their brand and their product is about being different to what you would expect from water. So it makes complete sense also that their advertising should stretch us in that direction. Otherwise, it's just not in keeping with who they are. So that does make a lot of sense. I guess it's also interesting when we look at this, like it's clearly very distinctive and very entertaining. It's also driving people to really, want to actually try the product as well or try the brand. So it's doing more than entertain, right? It's entertaining in order to make people want to go and try that thing that's quite cool and quite distinct to what they would normally see in the market.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the ad is extremely effective in in explaining what the product is, what it does, and how it benefits the consumer as well, which I think kind of intrigues people to go out and try it. That 28% as well is coming from a base of 3% of people before watching the ad saying they would buy Liquid Death when they're thinking of buying things like sports drinks, sports mixes. So that 28% takes it up to 31% of people after watching the ad would consider would have Liquid Death in that mix of what they'd buy when they were thinking about buying sports drinks or sports mixes. So that's huge.
Yeah, it's quite hard to get into that repertoire versus perhaps established or trusted brands.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I was at MadFest last week, and obviously I've heard quite a bit about Liquid Death, and the stories really intrigued me. But I was really desperate to have a can, even though I know it's just water. But I felt pretty cool at MadFest with my can of Liquid Death for the whole of last week. So I can see why that would go up, even this is for electrolytes specifically. I guess the one thing that we should perhaps comment on, and it's maybe not surprising given how hard it is for a new brand to establish itself, but that brand recall, I mean, we've got 3/5 of people being able to actually play back the brand, having only seen the ad within the context of programming and within a reel. So very much in a disguised way, we've got 3/5 of people playing back the brand, which I think is quite a lot. It's obviously below the norm. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we see there and why it might be?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes from brand awareness and how people are having to work harder to remember something that they weren't aware of before. We looked at some articles that said that when a census kind of was done in the US, just about almost 60% of people hadn't heard about the brand at all. And then on top of that, they've got quite a narrow target market, the people that they actually kind of aim towards communicating to, which are a Gen Z audience and like a young millennial. The brand's seen huge amounts of growth since it's been live in market, which was from 2019. So you feel like, okay, 5 years in market, huge growth, but it's still a very young brand in terms of the level of awareness that it has. So it's got almost like a very, very engaged pool of consumers, but doesn't necessarily have like that mass level of engagement yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess whenever we see advertising for newer brands, it is harder for them to go into memory. They don't have the distinctive brand assets. They don't have the people knowing what category they're in, the brand automatically coming to mind, all of those things. But I guess the real positive here is we have a question about really how ownable it is for Liquid Death, which is that uniqueness of brand impressions that you can see on the right hand side. And what's really clear here is it's totally ownable. There is no one else within waters or even, you know, non-alcoholic drinks category that could possibly do this advertising. And what that means is the distinctiveness of the brand, its assets, what it stands for, how it entertains people, will establish itself much more quickly than another brand would. And it means that so long as they continue in this way, which from everything I hear, they absolutely will, they understand their brand inside out and why it exists. They'll very rapidly start to reap the rewards of that, and very, you know, soon, obviously, future ads will get that brand recall like higher and higher. So
yeah,
good news. Okay, should we dive a little bit from there? So we've talked about how distinctive it is. We've talked about how it's made people want to try the brand. Shall we dive a little bit into kind of, I guess, the key moments within the ad and how we see that journey working?
Yeah, for sure. So already in that diagnosis of the ad's performance, we could see that it's very strongly kind of like emotionally engaging throughout, with that emotional intensity score being significantly above the norm. And we can see that what's actually driving that is the peaks of laughter throughout. And that's single-handedly done by what Ozzy Osbourne is saying and like what he's kind of misunderstanding of the situation that the boys are in. He's convinced that they're doing drugs, and they're trying to explain to him that they're just actually using an electrolyte powder, mixing it in their water to hydrate and to kind of provide some nutrients to their body. And every time Ozzy Osbourne talks about like a drug reference, that peak in laughter kind of goes up, and we can see it throughout. And then there was obviously that last moment where Ozzy Osbourne is kind of like seen laughing after his explanation of what boofing is gets cut, and he's like, the car is driving away and he's laughing into the distance whilst the boys are looking completely puzzled, and that drives kind of like a last little peak of laughter there amongst the audience, which is quite powerful. It's a nice way to end something that was just quite comical throughout.
Yeah, it is a nice end, because I guess, you know, the little window there for a few seconds where they're actually just showing on screen some facts about the product is inevitably the least engaging part of the whole ad. So at least to then bring people back in with with Ozzy, and that little bit of humor I think is great. The other point that's quite interesting around second 14, obviously you've got the laughter related to Ozzy, but then you've got that peak in likability when the boys are actually explaining that it's not a drug and what the product is, and that it's electrolytes. So again, it's pretty ideal from a kind of momentum point of view within the ad, that you've got all of those peaks of laughter, but you've also got emotional engagement when the product's being explained, and obviously that contrast between him talking about a drug and them actually talking about the goodness of what the product is very much like there.
Yeah, I think you can see that when there's that messaging of the product being like, it's drink mix, it's not drugs, it's got X amount of calories, X amount of like essential vitamins, as much as the main peak of like is when the boys are explaining it, that still drives a little bit towards the end as well, almost like reinforcing. And even the love side of things also goes up in that purple line there, which is very, very much kind of on par with the like peak. And yeah, it just reinforces the key kind of benefits of the products, and I think the audience really enjoys that.
Yeah, like juxtaposing the idea of something
Yeah.
good with something bad, i.e. drugs.
Mhm.
Okay, so we can see that laughter, is clearly, the humor is a massive part of what makes it differentiating. Can we dive a bit deeper into what else it is that people like about the ad, kind of beyond the humor? Because I think we've already captured that one.
So if we go into the likes, I mean, the characters are obviously a massive part of it. The role Ozzy plays and the role the boys play in kind of like correcting him and explaining what the product is really enjoyed. I'm mostly the humor, as we've talked about, but then there's elements coming through of like the information being conveyed, how it was innovative, unique, different, actually informative in many ways. And I think people were just pleasantly surprised that if they knew the brand, they were happy to know that they were playing now into the mix, like the electrolyte mix space. And if they didn't know the brand, they were quite happy to kind of just like have learned something new. So this person saying, I love rock music, so just the fact that Ozzy Osbourne was in the ad made me so happy. I also like to drink death or liquid death on the regular, so I'm thrilled to know they have a drink powder coming out. Then there was someone who was like, I thought the use of Ozzy Osbourne and the jokes were hysterical. It was also informative because I didn't know Liquid Death was in the electrolyte game. I thought it was just water previously. So again, it's almost like it's providing that extra bit of knowledge of, here's a new product, we're putting it out there, and for our regular consumers, this is just almost like a nice surprise, and for everyone else, it's just something that perhaps might get them into the brand if they haven't engaged with the canned waters before. But just generally here, like, it was hilarious. I giggled whilst watching when Ozzy was saying these things and laughing himself. Very entertaining. There was a moment, there was a comment, someone was saying, I like the fact that the guys are focused on the benefits of the product and basically looking at Ozzy Osbourne like he's a clueless fool. So again, kind of that element of the product benefits and how the story was told based on Ozzy's misinformation just made it really, really entertaining and engaging throughout.
Yeah, and it was in character for Ozzy, and it was in character for Liquid Death as well. And I guess that's where we see things go wrong often, is when
Yeah.
it either kind of goes away from the brand values or goes away from actually the celebrity values, and they just become a celebrity for celebrity's sake. So I think that's great. And the other thing worth referencing, when you're working on creative development, we often see advertisers struggling with this idea of entertainment versus whether they should be delivering factual information or just making people feel something. And this is a really great example of an ad that's been structured so well and as such a great idea, to be able to do all of those things. So using Ozzy for what he's famous for, entertaining people, making him laugh, whilst also, of course, comparing the idea of drugs that Ozzy thinks it is with what the product actually is, so that it's also informative. So it can be informative and dramatize what the brand or the product offers without being dull. And I think that's something that we regularly see advertisers struggling with. So, you know, if they're ever looking for inspiration, this is great inspiration on how to tell a story that manages to weave those two things together.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if the brand is anything but dull, they've got their brand image and brand persona right, and they've consistently executed across everything they've done, which works wonders for them.
Yeah, it makes sense. If we just dive a little bit quickly into Ozzy as well, like we
Yeah.
saw that obviously every time he makes a reference to drugs, people laugh, but that could be what he's saying as much as who he is. But we've also seen in the likes, people are talking about Ozzy. One of the challenges nowadays is actually whether when people use celebrities, do people know who they are, know what they're famous for? And I think that's also what makes this ad pretty unique, is in terms of what people know about Ozzy, if we can just dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the recognition of Ozzy in the ad was huge. Everyone knew who he was, younger, older, and there was high celebrity appeal for him as well, significantly beyond the norm that we see for the average celeb that features in a US ad. But looking here, just like the amount of people who said they like the question is essentially, do you recognize any celebrities in the ad? And the proportion of people who called out Ozzy Osbourne was huge. And then naturally in the likes we saw a number of comments being like, oh, it's just who he is, and like the fact that he was kind of like acting crazy just speaks to his persona, and it just made it like very easy to understand and kind of like easy to follow because he was just being himself essentially, and it added to the story.
Yeah, so I think here the learning would be, obviously, as I think we've talked about before, but using the celebrity in a way that's relevant to them and what they're famous for would be the learning. The watch out would be, make sure that you actually know how many people are going to recognize the celebrity. In
Yeah.
this case, it's universal, well chosen, but that is quite rare. What we normally see is there's many fewer people than you'd expect who recognize a celebrity. You know, media these days is much more fragmented. People are watching and reading about different people, different generations know different people. So to have someone as universal as Ozzy is obviously an incredibly good choice. But just a watch out for advertisers, really. Just, you know, make sure if you're playing on the celebrity, make sure that you know how many people are actually gonna, you know, get the added value of knowing who they are versus just being anyone on the street.
Yeah.
And then if we just go to one last thing, which is we ask a question, right, around I guess cultural sensitivity or risk. So is there any risk associated with the ad? Is it likely to cause any offence? Now, we ask this really to unpack what kind of risk there is, and so that advertisers can make an informed decision themselves on whether it's a risk they want to take or not. Liquid Death are always going to push that to the extremes that they can. Equally, they wouldn't want to cause any offence if it was around something related to being sexist potentially, or something that was not very accepting of different social groups or whatever. But in this case, this is quite a big number, right? Is that we've got a third of people here who are saying that there could be something that could be offensive here.
Yeah. I think, I mean, the brand is known to push boundaries, right? So it fits their image. We obviously have the number of people who think something might be seen as offensive or unpleasant. But when we uncover that as to like what people were thinking might be seen as offensive or disturbing in some kind of way, it's all the drugs references and the potential impact it might have on younger people as well. It's almost like that, the role modeling element of potentially people who don't know some of the words that Ozzy is saying might want to look into what they are and might be influenced somehow. There's obviously like a load of different speculations about what the ad could be causing, but the main concern is the drug referencing. which in this case for the brand is not particularly concerning, because to your point, it's nothing about them being potentially kind of like racist, sexist, discriminatory to any sort of type of person. It just touches on a taboo topic that some people might feel uncomfortable about, but the brand strategy is all about making people feel slightly uncomfortable. So I think in this case, there's nothing they should be worried about.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And the advice in this place would just be, click into those, read what they are, make sure that you're on the side of the line that you want to fall on as a
Yeah.
brand, and make sure it's things that are in the right space for your brand. And in this case, as I say, having read all of the verbatims associated with this, there's nothing that comes out of it that would be unexpected. Like the brand has made a decision. Often this question is most useful for when there's like there's something that actually causes great offense that would be unexpected. Whereas in this case, they knew that they were on the edge by talking about drugs, but actually they were using that to basically dramatize what it was that their product actually did. And it's the same kind of surprise that when you're carrying their actual can around of water, people assume that it's a beer and it's actually water. And that's what kind of makes it work. And it's a similar thing here in terms of what they're playing on. Well, I think that's a big congratulations on the ad. I think we thoroughly enjoyed looking at this one. And we just wanted to finish with one little look across some of their other creative work, right?
Yeah, so we talked about kind of their hard-hitting marketing. They've done a lot of activation previously around what their consumers have said about the brand, or what people have kind of either tweeted or messaged them online about. So we've got like an Amazon review being made into a side of a building poster there, a critique being put out on their socials with someone essentially being critical about the brand, saying it's a bit over the top, the fact that you're talking about selling your soul and so on, talking about Satan worshippers, and they're turning it around, essentially being like, people love us on the internet, people love talking about us, and that's all we're about. Then they're advertising generally in terms of their kind of TV ads and their video ads are quite hard hitting as well. They have some cartoon iterations of it that we can see here. When they launched their iced tea, they made a play as to almost, it's like metal grandmas and so on, because tea is usually associated with an older person drink. And then their usual kind of slogan of murder your thirst and we're looking for murderers and things like that, which is obviously quite provocative.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, this comes right back to, a founder brand that's very much being steered by the person who came up with the whole idea for it and knew that they wanted to, see how dull water was and think they could do it differently and take inspiration from way outside of that category. And then once they've done that, just stick with it and be really true to themselves and know how they're meant to entertain, which is exactly what we're seeing on this slide and what we saw with the ad itself.
Yeah,
Excellent. Any other builds, or shall we finish there?
I don't think so.
Great. Okay, well, thank you everyone, and we'll be back next week.